The summer heat crackled across the parched Montana landscape like the prelude to Judgment Day. But for Vivian Gardner, judgment had already come in the form of flames licking up the weathered wooden walls of the Carson family barn. Smoke filled her lungs as she pressed herself against the far corner of the hayloft, the rough-hewn planks beneath her feet growing warmer with each passing second. From below, through watering eyes, she spotted a figure bursting through the inferno that had once been the barn door, a man she'd sworn never to speak to again. "Vivian," his voice called out, strong and urgent over the roar of the flames. "The roof's about to go, climb down to me." It was 1884, and the town of Rico, Montana, was suffering through the worst drought in 20 years. The fire had started so quickly, racing through the dry hay like a demon set loose, trapping Vivian before she'd even realized the danger. Now, as smoke billowed around her, she stared down at the face of Clayton Ackerman, the very man who had shattered her heart just 1 week earlier. "I can't," she cried out, her voice breaking. The ladder that led to the loft had already been consumed by flames, leaving a 15-foot drop to the burning barn floor below. "You have to trust me," Clayton shouted, positioning himself below her, arms outstretched. His Stetson was missing, his face smudged with soot, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, remained fixed on hers with unwavering determination. "I'll catch you, Vive, I swear it." The heat intensified as the flames climbed higher around them. Vivian's dress clung to her skin, damp with sweat, as she inched toward the edge. 22 years of life flashed before her eyes growing up on her father's ranch, losing her mother to fever 3 years ago, meeting Clayton when he'd first arrived in Rico last spring. She'd fallen for him quickly, despite her father's warnings about cowboys passing through. Clayton had seemed different, steady, honest, until she discovered him with Lenora Bishop at the town social. "Why should I trust you now?" she called down, even as pieces of burning hay fell around her. Clayton's expression hardened. "Because I'm the only chance you've got." A beam crashed nearby, showering sparks. "Vivian, please." With the fire closing in, Vivian made her choice. She turned, lowering herself over the edge until she dangled by her fingertips, her skirts tangling around her legs. With a prayer on her lips, she released her grip and fell. The world spun for one heart-stopping moment before strong arms caught her. The impact sent them both tumbling to the floor, Clayton twisting to take the brunt of the fall. Without pause, he scrambled to his feet, pulled her up, and dragged her toward the exit, his arms shielding her from the falling debris. They burst through the doorway just as the roof began to cave in, the force of the collapse sending a blast of hot air that propelled them forward. They fell together onto the dirt yard, gasping and coughing as they crawled farther from the inferno. "The horses?" Vivian managed to ask between coughs. "Already out," Clayton answered, his voice raw. "Got them free first thing." Vivian's father, George Gardner, came running from the main house, followed by their ranch hand, Hector. In the distance, neighbors who had seen the smoke were arriving with buckets and shovels, though it was clear the barn was beyond saving. "Vivian." Her father shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" His weathered hands checked her for injuries, his face pale beneath his gray-streaked beard. "I'm all right, Pa," she assured him, though her lungs burned with each breath. George turned to Clayton, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering distrust. "You pulled her out," Clayton nodded, still catching his breath. "Was riding by when I saw the smoke." George extended his hand. "Then I owe you my thanks, Ackerman." Clayton accepted the handshake, but his eyes returned to Vivian. "No thanks needed, sir." As the neighbors organized into a bucket line to prevent the fire from spreading to nearby structures, Vivian allowed herself to be led back to the house. She glanced over her shoulder to see Clayton standing alone, watching her, before turning to help with the firefighting efforts. Despite his heroics, she told herself, nothing had changed between them. One rescue couldn't erase what she'd seen. The days following the fire brought the community of Rico together, as such tragedies often did. Neighbors helped clear the charred remains of the barn, and within 48 hours, plans were being made for a barn raising. The Gardner Ranch was one of the oldest in the county, and no one wanted to see it fall to ruin. Vivian kept herself busy with household tasks, determined not to dwell on thoughts of Clayton or the moment in his arms when he'd carried her from the flames. Her hands bore blisters from scrubbing smoke damage from the house's exterior walls, which had been blackened by the nearby blaze. On the third day, while hanging laundry in the yard, she spotted a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Clayton sat tall in the saddle, his bay gelding kicking up dust along the road. Vivian considered retreating inside, but pride kept her rooted in place. He dismounted at a respectful distance, removing his hat as he approached. "Miss Gardner," he greeted formally. "Mr. Ackerman," she replied, focusing on pinning a sheet to the line. "If you're looking for my father, he's in town purchasing supplies. It's you I came to see." He stepped closer, the sheet between them billowing in the breeze like a white flag neither was ready to wave. "How are you healing?" She showed him her bandaged hands. "A few burns, nothing serious." After a pause, she added, "Thanks to you," he nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "Vivian, about what you saw at the social, it's not my business who you keep company with," she interrupted. "You made your intentions clear enough." Frustration flashed across his face. "No, I didn't because you wouldn't let me explain." "What's to explain?" Vivian dropped the remaining clothespins back into their basket. "I saw you with your arms around Lenora." She was upset about her brother. "The letter had just arrived that morning. He was killed at Fort Laramie. I was consoling her, nothing more." His voice rose slightly. "If you'd stayed for even 1 minute instead of running off, you'd have known that." Vivian faltered. She hadn't known about Lenora's brother. The young man had joined the cavalry the previous year, seeking adventure away from Rico. "I'm sorry to hear about Thomas," she said quietly, "but that doesn't explain why you never came to explain yourself after." "I did," Clayton said, exasperation evident. "Twice. Your father said you weren't receiving visitors. The third time he threatened to use his shotgun if I didn't clear out." This revelation surprised Vivian. Her father had mentioned nothing of Clayton's visits. "Pa can be protective, with good reason. He doesn't know me, not really." Clayton took a breath. "But I was hoping you might give me the chance to prove myself, to you, if not to him." Vivian studied him, the earnestness in his expression, the way the sun highlighted the streaks of gold in his brown hair. She'd been drawn to his quiet confidence from the first moment she'd seen him breaking horses at the Wilkins place last spring. Unlike the other cowhands who drifted through Rico, Clayton had a gentleness about him that extended beyond his way with horses. "Why should I?" she asked, softer now. "Because I haven't been able to think of anything but you since I first saw you," he admitted. "And because I ran into a burning building for you. I'd like to think that counts for something." Despite herself, Vivian smiled. "I suppose it does." A throat cleared behind them. George Gardner stood at the edge of the yard, his expression stern as he regarded Clayton. "Pa," Vivian acknowledged. "Mr. Ackerman came to check on my well-being." "Did he now?" George approached, eyeing the cowboy. "Well, as you can see, she's mending fine." "Is there something else you needed, son?" Clayton straightened. "Actually, sir, I came to offer my services for the barn raising. I'm handy with tools, and I know you're short-handed since Hector broke his arm fighting the fire." George considered this. "The raising's set for Saturday. We'll need all the help we can get." After a moment of deliberation, he added, "You're welcome to join the effort, but I'll be watching you." "Understood, sir," Clayton replied, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll be here at first light." He turned to Vivian. "Miss Gardner." With a slight bow, he returned to his horse and rode off. Vivian watched him go, a flutter of hope stirring in her chest despite her best efforts to suppress it. "That boy's trouble," George muttered. "He saved my life, Pa. Doesn't make him husband material," he sighed, softening. "Your mother would have said I'm being too harsh. Maybe I am, but I've seen too many girls left heartbroken when the Cowboys move on." "Clayton's different," Vivian found herself saying. George studied his daughter. "For your sake, I hope you're right." Saturday dawned clear and cool, a welcome respite from the heat that had contributed to the barn fire. By sunrise, wagons were arriving at the Gardner property, laden with lumber tools and enough food to feed an army. The women set up tables for the midday meal while the men gathered around George, who laid out the plans for the new barn. Clayton arrived as promised, bringing with him several men from the Lazy S, where he worked as a wrangler. His boss, Samuel Sharp, had donated additional lumber for the project. A gesture of goodwill that impressed even George. Throughout the morning, Vivian kept busy helping the other women, but her eyes frequently strayed to where Clayton worked. He moved with purpose, his shirt soon soaked with honest labor. More than once, she caught him looking her way as well. During the midday meal, he maneuvered to sit near her on one of the long benches. "The work is going well," he said, accepting a plate of fried chicken and biscuits. "Your father knows what he's doing. Pa built the original barn himself 20 years ago," Vivian replied. "He's determined this one will be even sturdier." "I've been meaning to ask," Clayton said, lowering his voice. "How did the fire start?" Vivian glanced toward her father, ensuring he wasn't within earshot. "We're not entirely sure. Pa thinks it might have been a lantern that got knocked over during evening feeding. Hector blames himself, says he might not have secured it properly." "These things happen," Clayton reassured her. "Especially in drought conditions like we've had. Still, it's a significant setback. The harvest hasn't been good these past 2 years, and Pa was counting on selling those hay stores come winter." Vivian hadn't meant to reveal so much about their precarious financial situation, but something about Clayton made it easy to speak freely. "I might be able to help with that," Clayton offered. "The Lazy S has surplus this year. I could speak with Mr. Sharp." "We're not looking for charity," Vivian said quickly. Clayton smiled. "It wouldn't be charity, just neighbors helping neighbors. Isn't that what today is about?" Before Vivian could respond, her father called for the men to return to work. Clayton squeezed her hand briefly before rising from the bench, the simple touch sending warmth spreading through her. As the day progressed, the barn's framework took shape against the sky. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, punctuated by shouts of instruction and the occasional burst of laughter. Vivian found herself drawn outside more often than necessary, offering water to the workers and admiring their progress. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began its descent, disaster nearly struck again. Clayton was working on the roof beams when a support shifted unexpectedly. Several men shouted warnings as the heavy timber began to fall. With quick reflexes, Clayton managed to brace it with his shoulder, preventing it from collapsing entirely, but the strain was evident on his face. "Need more hands here," he called out, his voice strained. 4 men rushed to assist, stabilizing the beam and securing it properly. When they finished, Clayton climbed down, rolling his shoulder with a grimace. Vivian hurried over, concern overwhelming her remaining reservations. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," he assured her, though his face betrayed pain. "Just wrenched it a bit." "Let me see," she insisted, leading him to the shade of a nearby oak. With gentle fingers, she probed his shoulder, feeling for damage. "You'll have a nasty bruise, but I don't think anything's broken." "Your touch is healing enough," he said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustle of the barn raising faded away. Clayton reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Vivian," he began, "I know your father has his doubts about me. Maybe you do too, but I want you to know, Vivian." Her father's voice cut through the moment. "Bring more water for the men." With a sigh, Vivian stepped back. "Duty calls," she said with a small smile. "Rest that shoulder. We can't have you injured before the dancing starts." "Dancing?" Clayton raised an eyebrow. "There's always dancing after a barn raising," Vivian explained. "Surely you knew that." "I've never actually been to one before," he admitted. "I've spent most of my life moving from ranch to ranch." This revelation added another piece to the puzzle that was Clayton Ackerman. "Well, now you know." "Rest up, Cowboy. I expect you to save a dance for me." As she walked away, Vivian could feel his eyes following her, and for the first time since the social, her heart felt light. By dusk, the barn's main structure was complete. The roof and some of the interior work would continue over the next few days, but the accomplishment was significant enough to warrant celebration. Lanterns were hung from posts, casting a warm glow over the yard. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon lively music filled the air. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family: pies, cakes, roasted meats, and enough side dishes to feed the county. Children chased fireflies at the edges of the gathering while the adults talked, laughed, and eventually began to dance. Vivian, wearing her best blue dress for the occasion, found herself in demand as a dance partner. She accepted several offers, mostly from neighbors she'd known all her life, but her eyes kept searching for Clayton. When she finally spotted him, he was deep in conversation with her father. To her surprise, they weren't arguing. In fact, George seemed to be listening intently, occasionally nodding. When they concluded their talk with a handshake, Vivian's curiosity was piqued. Clayton approached her as the musicians began a slower tune. "May I have this dance, Miss Gardner?" She placed her hand in his. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your promise." "Never," he said, leading her into the dance. His hand at her waist was respectful but warm, his injured shoulder seemingly forgotten as they moved together. "I had some business to discuss with your father first." "I noticed. Should I be worried?" Clayton smiled. "Not at all. I was asking his permission." Vivian's heart skipped. "Permission for what? To court you properly?" His eyes held her steadily. "He was reluctant at first, but I think I managed to convince him I have honorable intentions." "And do you?" Vivian asked, breathless. "Have honorable intentions." "The most honorable," Clayton assured her. "I've never met anyone like you, Vivian. When I saw that fire, when I thought I might lose you before I ever really had you, it clarified things. Things, my feelings, my plans." The dance brought them closer. "I've been saving for a place of my own. Mr. Sharp has offered to sell me a parcel of land, good land, with water rights and enough acreage for a decent herd. I've been working toward it for 3 years now." Vivian absorbed this information. "You're planning to stay in Rico then, not move on?" "I've done enough moving to last a lifetime." His voice grew softer. "All I need is a reason to put down roots." The implication hung between them, as clear as the stars emerging in the evening sky. Vivian's heart raced as the dance ended, and they found themselves at the edge of the gathering, partially hidden from view by the new barn. "Clayton," she began, but words failed her. He touched her cheek gently. "I'm not asking for promises tonight, just a chance to show you who I really am." In response, Vivian raised herself on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise, a pledge of possibilities to come. When she pulled away, Clayton's expression was one of wonder. "I think I can agree to that," she whispered. The weeks that followed the barn raising saw Clayton becoming a regular visitor at the Gardner ranch. True to his word, he courted Vivian properly, always respectful of her father's watchful eye. They rode together on Sundays after church, picnicked by the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the property, and slowly shared the stories of their lives. Clayton told her of growing up in Kansas, losing his parents to typhoid when he was 16, and making his way west with nothing but his horse and the skills his father had taught him. Vivian shared her own loss, her mother's passing, her father's subsequent withdrawal into grief, and her fear that the ranch might not survive another bad season. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of color to the aspen groves, Clayton's visits took on a pattern of purpose. He began helping with repairs around the Gardner property, often staying for supper at George's grudging invitation. Slowly, the older man's resistance began to thaw as he recognized Clayton's work ethic and genuine care for both his daughter and the land. One evening in late September, Clayton arrived with news. "It's official," he announced during supper. "The land is mine. 10 acres to start, with an option for 20 more once I've established the ranch." George raised his coffee cup. "Congratulations, son. That's no small achievement." Vivian beamed with pride. "Have you thought of a name for it?" Clayton nodded. "Golden Valley Ranch." "The way the sun hits that meadow in the evening, it's something to see." "We should celebrate," Vivian suggested. "Perhaps a small gathering this weekend." George considered this. "Been a while since we hosted a proper social, might do us all good." Plans were made for Saturday evening. Vivian spent the intervening days cleaning, baking, and sending invitations to neighbors. Her excitement grew with each passing hour, not just for the gathering itself, but for what it represented: her father's acceptance of Clayton and the future that seemed increasingly within reach. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. Guests began arriving in the late afternoon, bringing food and good wishes. The musicians who had played at the barn raising returned, setting up in the yard. Lanterns were strung between trees, creating pools of golden light as dusk fell. Clayton appeared dressed in his best, a new shirt and polished boots marking the occasion's importance. When he saw Vivian in her green dress, the one her mother had made for her 20th birthday, his expression of admiration made her blush. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand. Like springtime in the midst of fall. The celebration was everything Vivian had hoped for: laughter, music, good food, and the community coming together to mark new beginnings. As the evening progressed, Clayton led her away from the crowd, toward the newly rebuilt barn. Its fresh timber still smelled of pine and promise. "Remember the last time we were here?" he asked, gesturing to the spot where they'd shared their first kiss. "How could I forget?" Vivian smiled. "It's where everything changed." Clayton took both her hands in his. "I'm hoping something else might change tonight." With deliberate movements, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he produced a ring, a simple gold band with a modest pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "The only thing of hers I managed to hold onto through all these years of wandering." Vivian's breath caught as he lowered himself to one knee. "Vivian Gardner, from the moment I pulled you from that fire, I knew my life would never be the same. You've become my reason for everything, for working, for dreaming, for building a future." His eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Clayton." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into an embrace. Their kiss was deeper this time, filled with the certainty of shared tomorrows. When they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, George was the first to notice the ring glinting on his daughter's finger. He crossed to them, his expression unreadable for a moment before breaking into a smile. "I had a feeling this was coming," he said, embracing Vivian and extending his hand to Clayton. "Welcome to the family, son." News of the engagement spread quickly through the gathering, resulting in a flurry of congratulations and impromptu toasts. The musicians struck up a special tune, and Clayton led Vivian into a dance that felt like flying. "When?" she asked as they twirled beneath the stars. "Spring," he suggested. "After the thaw, before the busy season, we could build a cabin on my land by then." "Spring sounds perfect," Vivian agreed. "A new beginning." The winter months passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Clayton divided his time between his duties at the Lazy S, developing his own property, and helping at the Gardner Ranch. He and George worked side by side to ensure the ranch would thrive, combining their knowledge and strength to prepare for the coming year. Vivian sewed her wedding dress from fabric ordered all the way from Denver, with lace trim that had once adorned her mother's gown. The women of Rico gathered regularly at the Gardner house, sharing wisdom and stories as they helped with the trousseau. Even Lenora Bishop joined these gatherings, any misunderstandings long since cleared. By April, the snow had retreated to the highest peaks and wildflowers carpeted the valleys. The cabin on Clayton's land stood complete, a sturdy two-room structure with a stone fireplace and windows that caught the morning sun. A barn and corral housed the beginnings of his herd, 6 quality heifers purchased with his savings, and a stallion that was part of his final payment from the Lazy S. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild. The ceremony took place on the Gardner Ranch, beneath an arbor woven with early blossoms and greenery. The entire community turned out to witness the union, the same people who had come together to raise the barn now gathering to raise hopes for a new family. Vivian walked toward Clayton on her father's arm, her heart so full it might burst. Clayton stood tall and proud, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. The years of loneliness that had marked both their lives seemed to fall away in that moment, replaced by the certainty of companionship and love. The vows they exchanged were traditional but heartfelt, promises of loyalty, respect, and devotion until death parted them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton's kiss was gentle yet possessive, acclaiming that Vivian returned with equal fervor. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with dancing, feasting, and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing two people who truly belong together. When it came time for the newlyweds to depart for their new home, they rode side by side on horses decorated with ribbons and flowers. "Mrs. Ackerman," Clayton said as they crested the hill that overlooked their land, their future. "How does it sound?" "Like the most beautiful name in the world," Vivian replied, her eyes taking in the cabin, the barn, and the wide expanse of promise that stretched before them. As they dismounted before their new home, Clayton swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Vivian wrapped her arms around his neck, remembering another time he had carried her out of danger and into a future neither of them could have imagined. "I love you, Vivian," he whispered against her hair. "From this day forward, forever." "And I love you," she replied, knowing with absolute certainty that the fire that had nearly taken her life had instead given her everything she'd ever wanted: a man of honor, a love worth fighting for, and a place to call home. In the years that followed, the Ackerman ranch flourished, as did their family. Twins, a boy and a girl, arrived the following spring, followed by 2 more sons in the years after. The partnership between Clayton and George Gardner strengthened both properties, allowing them to weather the challenges that came with ranching life. Whenever the anniversary of the fire came around, Clayton and Vivian would stand together on their porch, watching the sunset turn the valley to gold, and remember the moment that had brought them together. She trapped in the hayloft as flames spread, he below with arms outstretched, calling for her to climb down to him. A leap of faith that had led to a lifetime of love. And in the end, that was what mattered most: not the trials they had faced or the obstacles they had overcome, but the love that had given them the courage to reach for each other, even amid the flames.